But we're going to be talking about crown gall tonight. And I looked over the questions that I saw on the Rose Geek webpage. I think in this presentation, I will have answered most of them. If there, you can interrupt me at any time. Just unmute yourself, get my attention. You can't bother me with that kind of thing. But we're going to start off with what is crown gall. And crown gall is, as we know, is a disease of roses and many other plants. There's over 600 species of plants that are known to be infected by the bacterium, Agrobacterium tumefacens. If you Google it, you'll find some literature that will refer to it as Rhizobium radiobacter, but we go by Agrobacterium tumefacens. It's what I call a typical phytopathogenic bacterium. Most of them are short rods, gram-negative. This one fits the bill. So anyway, and what you're looking at there are cells of Agrobacterium tumefacens, and down in the bottom is a culture of it. And doesn't grow real big on a petri dish, but you get a whole bunch of colonies. But this slide is a little bit busy. Don't panic with it. We're going to start at number one. Basically, all this slide is saying is that the bacterium, in addition to having the regular bacterial DNA on the chromosomes, it also has something known as a plasmid. And a plasmid is a little tiny organelle inside the bacterial cell that has its own independent DNA. And the bacterium will, in number two, insert that DNA from the plasmid into the plant cell, where it will be incorporated into the plant's genome. And when this happens, the plant cell is transformed. And what it's going to do, the genes that have been inserted into the plant cell are going to make the cells divide uncontrollably, and they're going to produce some compounds that the plant cells never produce on their own or have no value to the plant, but are absolutely required for nutrition of the bacteria. So that's how this thing has evolved. The galls, as we know it, it's really amazing. They become visible in 2 to 3 weeks after infection. That's just how, and there's millions of these altered cells by that time. And that's, it's really incredible. If we go in and try to isolate from galls, young galls, we can isolate the bacterium from readily. Older galls, it's much harder, but that doesn't mean there's not bacterium there. Now, not all plants infected with Agrobacterium will have the bacterium go systemic, but rose is one of the few that is true. Okay, and so what this means is that if we get a gall on the roots, the bacterium can move through the xylem and be anywhere in that plant. And I'll emphasize this when we get to management. But what this means is we can't prune the gall out and cure the plant. And there's a lot of Rosarian misinformation that you can prune the gall out. I see it on chat pages a lot. Oh, just prune it out. But what you have to understand is that by the time you see the gall, the bacterium is moving throughout the plant. And so this is one of the things that makes crown gall so difficult to deal with. Now, Agrobacterium in number 6 can persist in the soil for many years. And that is because it becomes an organic matter decomposer in the soil. So it can live on organic matter in the soil, whether it's dead roots, whether it's organic matter that you have added to the rose bed, whatever. It can't get back into another root from another rose unless there's a wound. That wound is going to be made by insects, nematodes, frost heaving, and here's the key, emergence of secondary roots. You know, when a secondary root pushes out of the primary root, it actually causes a wound, and the bacterium can get in through that. So it's almost impossible to keep the bacterium out of the root once the soil has been infested with the bacterium. So new galls are tan and relatively smooth. Older galls become dark and woody and have cracks. It looks a lot like a brownish black cauliflower is what they look like. Head of cauliflower. The galls are often associated with pruning wounds when we have them up in the canopy. But galls can appear anywhere once the plant becomes infected and it goes systemic. Agrobacterium is active during the summer months, late spring, summer, early fall, when it gets cold, when soil temperatures start to drop below 45 degrees and air temperature is around 50, the bacterium goes dormant. Extreme cold will not kill it. It just lays there dormant, waiting for it to warm back up the next year. And I mentioned that it's a primary organic decomposer. This bacterium lives in the rhizosphere. The rhizosphere of the root is the area of soil around the root that is influenced by the root. Roots are constantly putting out exudates. Roots are constantly taking up water. And all the soil area, think three-dimensional around that root, that is impacted by that root, where it's taking up water, taking up nutrients, releasing exudates into the soil. All of that soil is considered part of the rhizosphere. And that's where this bacterium makes its home. So Agrobacterium tumefacens is going to be wherever the rose roots are once it's been in the soil. It prefers the kind of soil we want. Sandy loam soil, or soil that's been amended to make it porous so that water perks through it real good. That's exactly what it wants, because this is a very aerobic bacterium, so it needs a lot of oxygen. So the better the rose bed is, the better this bacterium is going to like it. That's frightening. We'll talk about it more in management, but you know, if you look at this drawing of Agrobacterium on roots, you can imagine that if you were digging that plant up with a shovel, that it would be very easy to cut through this root. To cut through a gall. If you do that, you're going to contaminate the shovel. If you come back in with a rototiller, you're going to contaminate the rototiller, and you're going to move the bacterium up and down the bed. And we're going to talk about what you can do about that when we get to management. Now, grass is absolutely a non-host for Agrobacterium tumefacens. So new beds that are made from areas that have been in grass are considered to be free of Agrobacterium tumefacens. And we want to keep them that way for as long as possible. One of the issues is if you have a bed where Agrobacterium has been a problem in the past, you have to understand that since there's over 600 plants, many of those are weeds. Morning glory is a particularly good host for this bacterium. So going into a place where an old bed or an old garden, where I'm going to put some rose beds in here, if there's been Agrobacterium in that soil before, and there are weeds, dicot weeds, there's going to be likely Agrobacterium still there. Now, in addition to being spread on plants and on pruners and cultivation equipment, Agrobacterium can be spread by splashing from soil. And so, you know, if you look in that picture at the bottom, look at those containers. Now, they're pretty tall, okay? But if there was some water that ran off the roof and splashed that soil and Agrobacterium was in the soil, well, there's a good chance you could wind up with some of it in your pot. Once it's there, it's going to go to work. It can also be spread in draining water. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you can do in just a minute. Now, one of the key things is the management is step one, is knowing what is and what is not crown gall. That is absolutely paramount. A agrobacterium gall is going to start on the side of a root, like in the top right picture. Now, as that gall enlarges, it's not going to make the whole stem swell. It's just going to engulf the stem and surround it. Okay, it came out of one side and it's going to grow around the stem. I often get people sending me in pictures or sending me in a sample, and they go, is this crown gall? And no, it's not. They have another problem. It's root knot nematode. Now, this is especially true when I get samples in from the deep south. And root knot nematode can be so different from crown gall in that I told you that crown gall is going to be on the side of the root and then engulf it, where the root knot nematode will cause a gall that causes the entire root to swell at that point of infection by the nematode. So with root knot, the swollen root is not on the side of the root, it's the whole root that's swollen into a gall. And so that's one way that I look to tell the two apart. And last, and I think I had some of these I had to deal with this weekend on the web. The emergence of adventitious roots, so secondary roots. If you look at that bottom picture, you can understand why somebody might be worried that that's the beginning of a crown gall. But if you look at it hard, especially, let me dig in my pockets. I think I have it here. Maybe I don't. Probably took it out. I have a little magnifying glass that I keep in my pocket, especially if I'm outside. I think it's sitting over there on the table. And, I'll pull it out, open it up and look. If it's a secondary root, it's not going to be just a massive cell. I'm going to see, if you look on that thing, you can see the root tip there where it's coming out. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's right there. And so when you look at these adventitious secondary roots and you look at them with a magnifying glass, you can tell it's a root and not crown gall. But just looking at it, and I get a lot of pictures. I got some pictures this past weekend. The root was in perfect focus. But what they wanted me to look at was out of focus because their phone kept focusing in on the entire root because it was much larger and not that. But you got to check to make sure it's not just a root. And that's not uncommon when we get new bare root roses, for some of those are going to be emerging. Now, step 2 is to inspect. I am suspicious with all new roses. I will have 1,200 new roses showing up at the Crossville Experiment Station in about, let's see, they'll be showing up somewhere around the second week of May, and we'll be putting them out pretty quick. But before they go out, I will have inspected every one of them. Well, I have 2 other people helping me, so we have about 400 roses each to inspect. But we are going to make sure that we are not introducing crown gall into that field. Right now, we've never had a problem with it, but we are very careful in inspecting things. And we're going to be looking for those small tan galls that are relatively smooth, that don't have a root tip. It's not a swelling of the whole root. It's a swelling of the side of the root where that gall is. And if you look in the bottom picture, the middle root system down, you can see a crown gall on the side of that root. That's about halfway down that root. And it makes it look big in this picture, but it really wasn't. And so if you buy roses in containers where they're already in mix, I don't recommend tearing through the root ball looking, but I pull it out of the container. I look at the roots the best I can, what I can see, and just to make sure that they are as clean. Your best defense against crown gall is not to bring it home. Okay, that's by far your best defense. Step 3, your roses in your garden should be inspected at least twice a year. I usually do this at the time that I am right before I do my spring pruning. So before I do my pruning, I'm going to go through all the roses from the winter, and I'm going to look for crown gall. Okay, because I'm not going to worry about pruning a rose that has it. It's coming out, and I can't cure it, so it's coming out. The second time I'm going to do it is again in the fall, right after the plants go dormant. I'm going to be looking, because foliage gets in your way and it makes it much more difficult to see small galls. So those are the 2 times. In the spring, right before I prune, my spring pruning, and in the fall, just after they go dormant and most of the leaves falling off. Anytime I'm removing an old rose, a rose that maybe it just hasn't performed well, or maybe it's because I don't want to dig another rose bed and I've got 5 new roses. So if something goes in, something has to come out. It's sort of with my house, at my house, where my wife loves antique furniture. She sees something she wants, and I just look at it and go, great, what's going to go? Because there's absolutely no wall space left. So, something has to come out. Well, whatever comes out, I'm throwing it away. I'm going to tear that root system apart. And I'm going to confirm that rose, even though I'm getting rid of it for whatever reason, with me, it might have been I bought it because I liked it, because it said it was fragrant. But if it's not fragrant, it doesn't have a home at my house. And so over time, I have weeded out a lot of roses that just didn't have fragrance. Beautiful roses, but hey, I may be visual, but my wife likes fragrance, and I know who actually is in control. So the bottom line is, I look. They are great sentinel plants. Those plants you're pulling out for any other reason, but are headed to the compost pile, I'm going to look. If I see crown gall, they're not going in the compost pile. We'll talk about that in a little bit. If I find one, well, not only have I removed the root, the plant, but I am going to remove, for a long time, I said, I recommended removing 2 bushels of soil if you found a rose that had crown gall. I quit saying that because a lot of people today don't know what a bushel basket is, what actually the size of a bushel basket is. A bushel basket is about 2 wheelbarrow loads of soil. That's a lot. And then what do you do with it? Well, the grass in your lawn is a non-host. So I'm going to go to a part of my yard that the water is not going to drain back into my rose beds or my other flower beds or to my vegetable garden, because many of the vegetables I'm going to plant are going to be susceptible to crown gall. Many of my herbaceous ornamentals that I'm going to put out in regular flower beds are going to be susceptible to crown gall. But I'm going to spread it out very, very thinly on my grass, like a top dressing at a golf course, because grass is a non-host. And over years, the crown gall populations will begin to decline and eventually die out. Now, how long will that take? Some literature says 2 to 3 years. Some says 5 to 7. So I say 8 to 10 to be safe. If you want to rotate out from crown gall, That's how long it would take. Now, the next step, step 4, is to sanitize pruners between bushes. And there's many different things that we can use. Bleach is the cheapest. 10% Clorox is the cheapest. But if you use Clorox, you've got to do one other step. You either have to add 4 or 5 drops of dish soap to your Clorox, or you have to add a few drops of rubbing alcohol. You need something that will break surface tension, because bleach is not a good wetting agent. And if there's any little nooks or crannies in the edge of that blade, it won't get to it, but it will harbor the bacterium there. The other problem that we have with bleach is that bleach is corrosive to many metals. And so over time, if you keep wiping your pruners or dipping them with bleach, you're going to start to dull them faster than they would otherwise. So what do I use personally? I either use Lysol wipes or alcohol wipes, 70% isopropyl, which is rubbing alcohol. You can buy it in a gallon jug. It's cheap. So you can dip them if you want, but I find putting some wipes in a plastic bag and taking them with me in the garden is the easiest way to go. So either Lysol, and there are other things you can buy, disinfectants. And I want you to understand something. Did you hear what I said? Disinfectants. Okay. Now, if you look at Lysol and you look and you watch the commercials on TV, they will call that a disinfectant. And they will say it will disinfect a table. Well, wait a minute. That meant the table was infected. You cannot infect a table. You cannot infect a pair of pruners. You can't infect a plant. Infest means that you put the pathogen onto an inanimate surface, something that it's not possible because it's not alive, so it can't cause disease. So these are actually disinfestants instead of disinfectants. Now, why do they use the word disinfectant? Because 98% of the population has never heard the word infest before, but they've all heard infect. So even though they're using the word wrong, they're doing it in a way that they can market the product so people will understand it. But we're smarter than that. So we will use disinfest instead of disinfect. Okay.
I have a quick question on this slide,
Yes.
Dr. Mark. I have been using 90% alcohol, and I think I heard from somebody that 70% is more effective than 90.
That is absolutely correct. 70% is better to use for 90% because at 90% alcohol, it's more difficult for the alcohol to be taken into the cell where it will be killed, where it will kill the cell. On the other hand, at 70%, that extra 20% water makes the alcohol much more readily penetrate the cell wall of the bacterium or the membrane, if there is a membrane of the virus particle, or the protein coat of the virus particle. It will break it down much more readily than 90%. 50% is, I won't say it's useless, but it's close. And you can buy 50% rubbing alcohol. There's really no need for that. They do it because people buy it because it's cheaper and they don't realize it's not working very well. 70% has been shown in scientific studies to be the optimum amount of alcohol for killing bacteria and inactivating viruses. Okay? All right. You know, some people and many virologists consider viruses alive. because they can replicate. Well, they replicate by commandeering the plant's machinery that replicates them for them. They do not have respiration. They have no metabolism. Okay. And with no respiration and no metabolism, it's hard for me to call them alive. But that's a personal opinion. So if they're not really alive, look at the Lysol label. Kills 99.9% of viruses. It's not alive. How are you killing it? That's interesting. You're inactivating because a virus is a nucleoprotein. And prions, which causes mad cow disease and some other diseases as well. We have one going in Tennessee right now called wasting disease of deer. It's caused by a prion. That's just a little piece of protein that can be replicated in plant or animal. I'm not plant cells, in animal cells, not in plant cells. And if it's just a piece of protein, it's not alive, but it can replicate just like a virus. So replication is not a requirement for being alive. But anyway, those are splitting hairs. Okay. Let's go to the next step. Step 5. We put a lot of emphasis on sanitizing pruners, but we don't want to forget about tillers and shovels either. Okay. So when you finish digging up that 2 bushels or 2 wheelbarrows full of soil, and you get through spreading it, before you shovel other soil or use that shovel again, you need to wash it really well. And then you're either going to have to dip it. It's hard to wipe. They're usually big in the tines. So I just mix the rubbing alcohol or buy Lysol, that I'm going to use, follow the directions on how much to add to water. And I just spray the shovel or the tines of the tiller to run off. And I'm going to do this so that I can disinfest them from agrobacterium so that I know I'm not moving it somewhere else where I don't want it. And this is something that is often missed by people. Most rosarians know about sanitizing their pruners. They forget about the other equipment that comes in contact with soil. If you use a hoe, same thing. You need to sanitize it as well. Okay. And so these are just common sense things, but for some reason it's often missed. Now, if we go to step 6, what can we do? Many years ago, this shows my age, when I was a little boy, we had a garden. And every year where the rows were going to be, we would put plastic down and throw dirt on top of the edges of the plastic. And underneath the plastic, before we put it down, every so often, there would be a little board turned sideways that had a nail. And there would be a can of methyl bromide right beside it. And so what you had to do was, methyl bromide is a soil fumigant, but it'll kill you too. Now, it's odorless and you can't detect it. So it often had chloropryctin or tear gas mixed in with it. So if you got a whiff of tear gas, you knew you were getting a whiff of methyl bromide too. But I never experienced that because you would take the can and the nail and you would poke the can and you would hear shh, and you would know that was the methyl bromide coming out of the can because it volatilized to a gas as soon as the pressure inside the can was released. And then you take off running down the road to the next one. But we can't buy methyl bromide anymore. The last soil fumigant that was readily available was Vapam, and it was taken off the market in the early 1990s. So we can't fumigate beds. But one thing we can do, if we want to get rid of it, is solarization. And we can do that in a goodly part of the eastern United States. But it takes time. This is not fast. You know, the methyl bromide, we do that, let it sit for a couple of days, we're good to go. But with solarization, you're going to leave that bed empty for a whole growing season. And what you want to do if you want to go solarization, now it's great because it takes out weeds too, and it's going to take out any pathogenic fungi and other bacteria in the soil, is you till it, you wet it down good after you till it, put the plastic down, and you see here in this picture, they use bricks. It doesn't really matter what. It doesn't have to be a perfect seal. This isn't an airtight thing like you were using a fumigant. And then you just let the sun have, it's like a miniature greenhouse. We know how hot greenhouses can get. And so this is clear plastic, and you just lay it down and you let it sit there all summer. And it will bake, and it will get to about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And that will go down to about a foot, which is about as far as you have to go for crown gall because it's very aerobic. The deeper you go, the less oxygen there is. Wet heat kills faster than dry heat. That is why we want to make sure that we water it down before we put the plastic. Now, we all love roses. That's why we're here. We're rose geeks. But another thing you can do, and this works for if you have a problem with armillaria root rot goes, well, I'm just tired of growing roses in this bed. I do not want it sitting empty all year long. So I'm going to learn to like ornamental grasses because they're an absolute, remember grass, if it's the bed emitting grass before, we assume there's no agrobacterium there. Ornamental grasses will not be bothered by high levels of agrobacterium in the soil at all. So this is one thing we can do. Now, to take that a step farther, the University of Illinois and Texas A&M University put out lists of plants that they had tested that were not host of agrobacterium. Now, these are woody ornamental plants. And these are not, in my opinion, most of these are not substitutes for roses. Okay. For instance, you don't see hydrangeas on the list because they are susceptible to crown gall. Okay. But these are plants that are not, that can be planted where you have soil contaminated and you don't want to take some of the other steps that I've mentioned. Now, there are many herbaceous ornamentals that you can put out as well. And unfortunately, I have never seen a list of resistant herbaceous ornamentals, annuals. By that, I mean annuals and perennials. But what I have found, and you can find this on the web, just like I have, you just Google herbaceous ornamentals or bedding plants or perennials that are resistant, and you won't find anything, but you will find this list of plants like begonias, asters. You see begonias actually on here in two different places. Chrysanthemum. There are many different things. Well, they got the common name and the scientific name, but these are all plants that you cannot substitute because they're all susceptible. So you put them out and the bacterium, it will most likely. There are some strains that are Pacific, but and there are multiple strains in roses, but the most common strain in roses will go to other things. So you can't substitute anything here that's on the list. Now, in addition to this list, there is another one as well put out by Michigan State. And it has some of the same things, but it has many things that are different as well. So between these two lists, so you say, well, Doc, what's left? Well, did you see marigolds on either list? No. Did you see petunias on either list? No. So things like that you could use. But geranium, which was not on the other list, is on this one. And often, have you ever noticed that there are people who like to plant geraniums around their roses? It's not a good idea. That's another way you can introduce crown gall in to your rose beds. So in the past, rose beds were just these long rows, mulch and roses. Today, a lot of people getting into roses want mixed plants. So you need to know what plants, woody plants are resistant if you're going to go to mixed plant route, or what herbaceous ornamentals not to plant if you are trying to keep crown gall at bay. And these lists are available on the web, and they're not hard to find. They're not hard to find at all. Now, the next step, antibiotic root dips. One of the things that I have, this is the time of year I get these questions. I've ordered a box of roses. I got 7. One has crown gall, the other 6 do not. Are they infected after being shipped with that plant that has crown gall? Do I have to throw all the roses away? Or do I have to return them all? The answer is no, you don't. Vertilone fire blight spray will not help you if the plant is infected. It is strictly used as a protectant. But you can take those other roses, and it says on that label there at the top, use a tablespoon for 2.5 gallons. No, if you read the fine print that's on the back, not here, you will find that for crown gall prevention, you need to use 2 tablespoons per 2.5 gallons. And you just dip the roses in this and let them sit for about 10 minutes. So you mix it up in a bucket, put the roots down in it, let it sit for 10 minutes, pull it out, shake it off, put the next one in, let it sit. Or if your bucket's big enough and maybe you mix up 5 gallons of this antibiotic solution, you could probably do them all in a 5-gallon bucket together if they're not too large. And if you do this, you can then feel very good that you have protected if any crown gall bacteria got on the surface of those roots. You've got an excellent chance that you've now taken care of it. Okay, I would not soak them in Clorox. Clorox damages roots. Will penetrate the roots, and any cells it comes in contact with, it will kill. So you don't want to use something like that. But fire blight spray, it has been proven to be effective for protecting roses before you plant them. Okay, so this is one thing we can do. All right, now I get asked a lot about biologicals, and there are a number of biologicals such as Gallatol, and there's one called Digall, Gallatol A, which is strain K84 of Agrobacterium radiobacter. That's been around for a while. There is a newer strain, which is a transformed strain of K84. It may be a little more desirable, but here's the problem with both of them. There are studies that Agrobacterium radiobacter work in reducing incidence of crown gall where it was used in New Zealand, Australia, and in Spain. But there have been several studies done in North America. When I say North America, Canada, and the United States, and it didn't work in any of them. Now, I don't know why it worked in New Zealand, in the New Zealand study, in the Australian study, in the Spanish study, and not in the Canadian one out of British Columbia or the two that were done in the United States, but it didn't. So I have three
Dr.
studies.
Mark,
Yeah,
when will we use these?
you would use these as protectants. All these things are protectants.
Okay.
So, but people will also add this to soil and drench soil with it to try to reduce agrobacterium in the soil. And it's not been shown to be effective. So I don't recommend any of them. Now, Gall-X is also sold by the same company that produces Gallatrol A. And there are some people that before they buy it, they think they're buying a biological. But Gall-X is a chemical protectant. That's 2,4-xylenol and metacresol. Cresol post. Okay. So this is a chemical, and these are all protectants. And remember, if you want to try one, and I'm not telling you not to try, but if you want to try one to try to reduce agrobacterium populations in the soil, never mix it up with chlorinated water, because you will kill the agrobacterium radiobacter if you use chlorinated water with it. So you don't want to do that. So buy some distilled water to mix it up with. So do I recommend any of them? No, I don't, because I don't have any definitive proof that they work. So they then all get put for me in the same category that I say, well, I don't know if it worked if you stripped naked, shook gourds, and did incantations as you danced around your roses. I don't know if that would work, but to me, I haven't seen anything that says that it won't. And I don't have any data that says that these things work either on this continent. The only things that you will find on the web that say that they work is the materials that come from the companies trying to sell you the product. And I'm always suspicious of those. I haven't found a single independent study done in the United States where any of these products work. So do I recommend any of them? No. But I'm not going to tell you not to use them. It's your money. And P.T. Barnum had an excellent observation about people and their money. Okay, so I'll just leave it at that. Now, there are some things, though, that I don't recommend, and absolutely don't. Pruning out galls to cure a plant. I've seen that 14 times on Paul Zimmerman's Rose Gardening webpage this year, where people say, in the comments section, when somebody said, they say, just prune it out, it'll be fine. Or they'll say, prune it out and put some hydrogen peroxide on it, and it will be fine. Well, if the thing's going systemic in the plant, how is it going to be fine? Because we know that agrobacterium will go systemic in roses. So there's no way to cure the plant. So I don't recommend trying to cure the plant by cutting the galls out. If there's a gall on the cane, assume it's already gone to the roots of the plant. So I just don't do it. The other thing, and this keeps coming up, and somebody asked this, and I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, but I did have to send it to some of my colleagues, and I said, okay, guys, somebody wants to know about bleach and adding it to soil. And absolutely not. And there's many reasons not. First of all, most bleaches have a pH of close to 9. So we really don't want to be adding some, and their buffering capacity is pretty damn high, because when the pH starts to go down, the sodium hypochlorite, which is the active ingredient in bleach, which not only is a sterilant, but for bleaching your clothes, it starts to break down. So that stuff's pretty stable. So we don't want to add something with that high pH to our soil. The second thing is that it's going to destroy any harm, not destroy, but it's going to really It won't kill them all, but it's really going to knock down the populations of beneficial fungi and bacteria in the soil. It's going to seriously damage any mycorrhizae in the soil, fungi in the soil. So we don't want to be using bleach. And the last is, as bleach breaks down, it's sodium hypochlorite. So it's going to break down, and we're going to have salts produced. So we may have an accumulation of salt in the soil as well. So how much would you use? Well, that's real easy, 0. Okay, you just don't want to be adding bleach to the soil at all. You know, it's okay I talk about using bleach to sterilize pots before we use them, you know, old pots, if we want to reuse them, wipe them down with Clorox wipes, plastic pots, that's perfectly fine to do. But then I'm going to rinse them off before I use them with water.
And I'm so glad that you joined us.
Always happy to be here, and I will be monitoring now that I don't know why y'all accepted me as a member of Rose Geeks, on Facebook. I've always, as Groucho Marx was right. He was asked why he didn't join the Actors Guild, and he said, I have high standards. I would never join any group that would have me as a member. So, y'all are really scraping the bucket at getting me as a member of Rose Geeks, but I like your name.
Very nice.
That is a lot. Bye-bye, guys. It was fun being,
so much.
and I will see you on the Facebook page, I'm sure.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.